Hey everyone, welcome to this deep dive. And well, today it's all about introvert happiness, how those of us who love our alone time can really make the most of life.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area, tons to unpack.
We've got, let's see, starting broad, a Wikipedia article on, introversion, extroversion, the definitions, the history.
Right, kind of setting the stage.
That we're getting practical with a blog post from the Denver Health Medical Plan. It's all about like tips for introverts to find happiness.
Ooh, I like where this is going.
Me too.
Hmm.
And to really get into the nitty-gritty, we've got a couple research articles.
One from PeerJ caught my eye. It's diving deep into, what actually makes introverts happy, focusing on relationships and how we handle our emotions.
And the second one, from Frontiers in Psychology, it looks at this thing called social engagement and how it ties into self-esteem.
Interesting. So not just if introverts can be happy, but the how.
Exactly. That's our mission today,
Mm,
to walk away with like real stuff you can use.
love it. Now, before we get lost in the details, we got to make sure we're all on the same page. What is introversion, right? And just as important, what it isn't.
Myth-busting time.
Exactly. That Wikipedia article makes it super clear. Introversion, it's not shyness, it's not social anxiety, it's not being afraid of judgment.
Okay, so if it's not those things, then what is it about? How does this whole energy thing come into play?
Right, you hear that a lot. That Denver Health blog, they put it nicely. It's this tendency to be more inward focused, not as driven by, hanging out with tons of people.
Compared to extroverts who seem to get energy from those crowds.
Yeah, exactly. But it doesn't mean introverts dislike socializing, just that maybe we need less of it.
Makes sense. And I remember that blog post also talked about dopamine. Right. Like, could there be actual brain differences involved?
Yeah, they suggested that dopamine, that feel-good chemical, it gets released when we're rewarded. And for extroverts, it seems like social rewards, they just hit different.
Like they get a bigger high from being around people.
Could be. So maybe that explains why some folks are energized by parties, while others, like us, end up feeling drained.
Totally. I'm definitely the drain type. But speaking of different ways of seeing the world, there was this Jung quote in that Wikipedia article. It really stuck with me.
Yeah, Jung. From way back in 1921, he had this amazing way of describing introverts.
He talked about how we find pleasure in like self-communings and how our inner world is this safe harbor, or even get this, a walled-in garden.
That's so poetic, right? It captures the essence of finding solace within yourself.
Like the outside world can be great, but that deep rejuvenation comes from that internal space.
Totally. And that leads us to something both Wikipedia and that Denver Health blog emphasized. Introversion and extroversion, they're not black and white.
It's not like you're one or the other, right?
Exactly. Most people fall somewhere on a spectrum, and a lot of us are right in the middle, those ambiverts.
Like that bell curve they showed in the blog post. It really hammered home that it's totally normal to have a mix of both. Some days you're social, others you crave solitude. It's not about fitting a mold, but getting to know your needs.
Well said. Now, I'm really curious to dig into that research. What does the data say about this whole introvert happiness thing?
Let's get to the good stuff. That PeerJ article, they jump right into the link between extroversion and happiness. And, well, not a huge shocker, extroverts often report being happier.
Right, that's a common finding, but before anyone gets bummed out, it's a general trend, not a rule.
Exactly. Because in that same study, 33% of those who said they were happy, they were introverts.
It's not a small number. It shows introversion isn't some roadblock to happiness.
And the PeerJ study also brought up this social quality idea. I'm not sure I totally get that.
This is where it gets interesting. It's not just about how many friends you have, but the quality of those connections.
Especially for us introverts.
Exactly. It's about a few deep, meaningful relationships that offer real support and understanding.
So finding your tribe, the people who truly get you.
That's it. The researchers actually looked at whether people felt supported, could confide in others, had shared interests.
So it's about feeling nourished by your relationships, not drained.
Exactly. They found that introverts with these high-quality connections, they were significantly happier.
So those relationships, they're like a buffer against the challenges of, a world that sometimes seems to favor extroverts.
I like that. A buffer. It's about creating an environment that lets you be your authentic self and thrive.
That's empowering. Now that PeerJ study, they didn't stop there. They also brought up emotion regulation.
Oh, fascinating stuff. It's basically being able to manage your emotions in a healthy way.
Like having a toolbox for handling your feelings.
Exactly. And they found a link between emotion regulation skills and, you guessed it, happiness. and better relationships.
So if you're constantly battling intense emotions, it's tough to have good interactions.
Right, but if you've got a handle on your feelings, you can navigate things authentically.
Makes total sense. Do you ever notice that in your own life, how managing your emotions affects your interactions?
Oh, absolutely. All the time. It's something I'm constantly working on. But the study suggests it might be especially key for introverts.
So it's like a formula is emerging.
Hmm.
Introversion plus strong connections, plus a dash of emotion regulation equals happiness.
You got it. The researchers actually called it that, an introvert happiness formula. And the happiest introverts had both great relationships and were good at regulating emotions.
Wow, so it's not about changing who you are, but playing to your strengths, finding your people, and managing that inner world.
Exactly. Now, speaking of social stuff, that second article from Frontiers in Psychology, they looked at this social engagement concept. It adds another layer.
Yeah, they had that scale measuring, like how much you're willing to collaborate versus how much you'd rather hang back.
Right. Are you diving into group projects or observing first?
And the study found introverts who scored higher on that willing to collaborate side, they also had higher self-esteem.
Interesting. So even if it doesn't come naturally, pushing yourself a bit socially might have benefits?
Like a positive feedback loop. You engage, you get more confident, which makes you want to engage more, and so on.
Exactly. And that brings us back to those small social risks from that Denver health blog.
They really emphasized taking baby steps, like reconnecting with a friend or joining a group for something you already enjoy.
Those small steps can lead to big changes. It's about building those social muscles gradually.
And celebrating every win along the way.
Yeah.
But what really struck me from that blog was their focus on authentic engagement.
Ah, yes. That's crucial for introverts, isn't it?
It's about finding those social situations where you can genuinely be yourself,
Your niche, where your introverted qualities are truly appreciated.
instead of forcing yourself into those huge networking events. Maybe it's a small dinner with close friends, or finding a yoga studio with a more intimate vibe.
Tailoring your social experiences to you?
Exactly. It's about honoring your introverted nature and finding those spaces that feel truly nourishing, not draining.
Well said. So, after all this, the big question, can introverts truly be happy?
I think we're getting a pretty clear answer here. What do you think?
Yeah, without a doubt. While the world may often seem geared towards extroverts, that doesn't mean introverts can't thrive.
We've seen that happy introverts are out there, living their best lives. It's about understanding yourself, building those strong connections, and learning to manage your emotions.
As that Denver health blog highlighted, taking small steps, celebrating your wins, and focusing on authentic engagement.
It's a journey of self-discovery and empowerment.
Absolutely. It's about creating a life that feels true to you, whether you're the life of the party or the quiet observer in the corner.
And remember, there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Experiment. Find what works for you and celebrate those introverted strengths.
This has been such an insightful dive into introvert happiness. I feel like I've got a whole new perspective.
Me too. It's
Yeah.
not about fitting into some extroverted mold, but embracing who you are.
Thanks for joining us on this journey. We'll be back with more insights in part 2. Okay, so we've talked about quality over quantity when it comes to those connections for us introverts. But what does that actually look like? Like, how do you know if you've got one of those high-quality relationships?
That's a good question. I think for a lot of introverts, it comes down to like feeling truly understood, feeling seen for who you are. Even the parts that maybe you don't share with everyone.
Not having to pretend to be more extroverted.
Exactly. And those Piaget researchers, they had some specific things they looked at when they were measuring social quality.
Like what?
So they asked people if they felt supported, if they could confide in others, if they felt like they had shared interests and values with the people they were close to.
It's like, do your relationships feel nourishing? Or are they just kind of there?
Yeah, and for introverts especially, I think that feeling of being nourished by your connections is super important.
It's like, we might not need a ton of social interaction, but when we do connect, we want it to be meaningful.
Exactly. And that study found introverts who had those high-quality relationships, they were just happier, plain and simple.
So it's not about the number of friends on Facebook. It's about the depth of those connections.
Exactly. Now, speaking of connecting with others, remember that Frontiers in Psychology article we talked about with the whole like willingness to collaborate versus reluctance to engage thing?
Yeah. And that study found a link between being more willing to collaborate and having higher self-esteem,
Right.
even for introverts.
Right. It's fascinating, isn't it? Like, even if putting yourself out there socially doesn't come naturally, it can actually make you feel better about yourself.
So it's like the more you do it, the easier it gets and the more confident you become.
Yeah. And that confidence can then spill over into other areas of your life. It's like a positive feedback loop.
I like that. And it ties into what that Denver Health blog was saying about taking small social risks.
Yeah, like baby steps. You don't
Yeah.
have to go from 0 to 60 overnight.
So instead of staying home every Friday night, maybe you challenge yourself to go to that low-key get-together with some friends.
Or maybe you strike up a conversation with a coworker you admire. Little things like that can make a big difference.
It's all about progress, not perfection.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And the Denver Health folks, they had some other great tips too, like remembering to focus on your strengths. As introverts, we often have a lot to offer.
It's just sometimes we express it in different ways.
Right. Like maybe you're not the loudest person in the room, but you're an amazing listener, or you're really good at offering thoughtful insights.
So it's about finding those situations where those qualities are appreciated.
And remembering to choose your social battles wisely.
Yes. That's a big one for me. It's like learning to say no sometimes.
Absolutely. It's okay to protect your energy. And that blog post, they also talked a lot about self-care.
Like making sure you're doing things that recharge your batteries.
Exactly. Things like spending time in nature, reading a good book, listening to music, whatever fills your cup.
Those restorative niches.
Yes, you got to make time for those. So, dear listener, we want to leave you with this thought. What are your restorative niches? What are the things that make you feel most alive and recharged?
What brings you a sense of peace?
And how can you make sure you're making space for those things in your life?
Because at the end of the day, happiness isn't a one-size-fits-all formula.
It's about finding what works for you. And for us introverts, that often means honoring our need for solitude, finding those deep connections, and taking care of ourselves.
This has been such a fascinating exploration of introvert happiness. I feel like I've learned so much.
Me too. And there's still more to come. We'll be back with part 3 soon, so stay tuned.
You know, it's funny. We talk about finding happiness as if it's this big thing, this like destination. But sometimes I think it's more about those smaller moments, those little sparks of joy you find along the way.
Yeah, totally. I think we can get so caught up in this idea of arriving at happiness that we forget to appreciate what's right in front of us.
And especially for us introverts, it's like sometimes those little moments of quiet contentment, they're the ones that really matter.
Absolutely. Curling up with a good book, having a deep conversation with a close friend, or just, enjoying a peaceful morning with a cup of coffee.
Those are the things that make life worth living. And you know, what's interesting is when we embrace those things, when we embrace our introversion, we actually bring something special to the world.
I love that. It's like instead of trying to fit in, to be more extroverted, we can actually celebrate what makes us unique.
And honestly, the world needs more of that, more of those quiet strengths that introverts bring to the table.
Totally. Introverts, we tend to be great listeners. We're thoughtful. We're often really empathetic.
We might not be the loudest voices in the room, but we have a lot to offer.
So to all the introverts out there listening, remember that your introversion is a gift, not a burden.
It's a superpower. And when you embrace it, you can achieve amazing things.
This has been such a rewarding conversation. I feel like we've really uncovered some valuable insights about introvert happiness.
Me too. It's like we've given ourselves permission to be who we truly are and to find happiness on our own terms.
And to all the introverts out there, keep shining your light, keep embracing those quiet strengths.
And remember, you're not alone on this journey. There's a whole community of us out here cheering you on.
That's right. And until next time.